Thanks a lot, Mark, for coming on the Radical Fabulatorium. I appreciate you swinging by.
Well, interestingly, when we were talking about this, I was thinking it's been such a long time since I've been in local FM. Actually, in my day, it was called CRSJ, Campus Radio St. John. And I must say that coming down this aisle about a few minutes ago, it really brought back a lot of memories. So I do thank you for this opportunity, both because I love chatting about my interests and so on, but being back in this building, it's been, I guess since 1995 or 1994, maybe even 1993.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I guess we should shout out Colin Swift because he's the one who hooked me up with your contact info.
Yes.
After I chatted with him, he thought it would be I would be interested to speak with you. So
yeah, certainly. Thanks, Colin.
Cool. So one thing, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we could talk about, but one thing that just kind of popped into my mind was the show you put together, Shutter. So I wanted to add, well, I got the catchphrase in my mind, but it's Shutter, not Shutter
You're
down.
close.
Shutter,
You're close.
Shutter.
You get three answers here.
I probably have it written down, so I can cheat.
It's okay.
You know?
Shutter Speed Photography Challenge.
Yes, Shutter Speed Photography Challenge.
Yeah.
So there's an episode, or in season 1, there's an episode where, and I'm not really a photography person, so there's an episode where a gentleman is doing a landscape shot, and I think it's like a beach or like a water shot, but he's holding on to a piece of like shrubbery or a branch.
Yes.
And he's positioning it in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that made me have like a behind the scenes moment, like, whoa, like if I would have just seen the picture with the branch in front of the camera, I would have assumed he's standing behind a tree. Mm-hmm. But he's holding the branch in front of his camera. So it made me think like about the magic of it, or kind of like the, like you see a landscape photo and you would just assume you're looking at exactly what a person would see with their own eyes. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that just kind of came into my mind. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because it opens up a very, very important discussion on the degrees, or I guess you would say the silos of ethics with regards to photography. And I actually love talking about this because it's actually really, really heated up lately with AI in photography.
Of course.
But there are many genres of photography that have different, I guess you could say, levels or degrees of ethics with regards to editing. And even, like you mentioned, putting that little shrub or tree or leaf in front of the lens to add a sense of three-dimensionality. And that's exactly what he did to create that depth. And if you are involved in, say, working for a newspaper, so that would be photojournalism or documentary photography, you don't have the luxury of doing extra stuff like that. There are very clear boundaries that are put in place for how much you can edit the photo, what you can do pre-planning the photo. But when it comes to art, it doesn't matter. You can do anything that you want. And because this, although this show that you're referring to that we did, it did have some degree of, we need some aspect of truthfulness. That little artistic element of adding that leaf is certainly acceptable. So every genre of photography has varying degrees of ethics with regards to how much you can alter the image. And it's a discussion that's really important. And like I said, it's really heated up lately with how, originally the software called Midjourney was creating images that were really lifelike. And now we're up to video, Hollywood cinematic video that is incredibly lifelike. So yeah, the world of ethics and photography and videography is going insane right now.
Cool. So that's, ethics. So that's not the word I would have associated. I guess I just didn't think about silos of ethics, but that's incredibly fascinating. So yeah, there must be people who specialize in that or studying ethics or like controlling ethics or...
I definitely assume so.
Okay.
And especially because, at this point, if you take a look at any of the cinematic video that's being produced, just, you can find that in YouTube. I can almost guarantee you that today, on this day that we're recording this podcast, there are videos out there that no one would know are not real. And can you imagine how that's going to change next week, next month, next year? It is going to be flawless, flawless, flawless. And these are interesting times. It's almost like I'm old enough to have gone through the transition of film, using film, both slide film and negatives, and the transition where Photoshop became it was important in the film days in a sense, but you had to scan your slides, you had to scan your negatives, and that was very expensive back then. But then when digital cameras came around, I think I had a Nikon digital camera. I forget what it was called, maybe a D90 or something. Then it seemed like the whole world had changed, and there was a lot of photographers who said, "This is cheating. I'm never going to buy digital and film forever." And a lot of times, if they were working in the commercial space, they actually went out of business. And the disruption of all of these sort of these grand shakings, for lack of a better term, will sort of be very advantageous to one group of photographers or incredibly damaging to another group. It depends on how you want to ride that wave.
Okay. A lot of these conversations and these kind of ideas I bring back to music, because that's kind of where I come from, music, and I studied audio engineering. And so I've seen similar trends in how much you can do digitally to emulate or imitate the analog world.
Yeah.
And it's similar debates where you can like auto-tune and fake drums and all this stuff, fake reverb sounds that you can sound like you're in like Massey Hall or sound like you're in some studio in the UK. And there's that kind of debate where, that's cheating or that's not right. I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to use it. Versus like, it's just another tool at my disposal. And if I use it creatively and organically and truthfully, or whatever word you want to say, it just augments the art.
Yeah, exactly. And your industry, in the sense of, you guys are going through the exact same thing that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And, AI created music. It's a really tough double-edged sword that none of us really have an answer to yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's going to take a while too. It's changing so quickly. So, Could you maybe just because I know nothing about photography, you said slide film and negatives. What's the difference?
Yeah, so slide film would be, I always have fond memories of my family, my parents doing slideshows where they have the Kodak carousels with the slides that drop into the carousels and you project it on the wall. Mm-hmm. And I always have fond memories of those. Anyway, that's what a slide film is. Now, some people technically call it a transparency, but that would be the Kodak with the cardboard square around the film. Now, a negative would be your normal, you take it into the drugstore to get your 24 pictures back, and that would be a negative. So those were the two types. A negative, or the slide film, also called a positive. And I myself loved slide film because it was crisp, it was colorful, and it was punchy. It was very expensive, though, a lot more expensive than negative film. And
would the consumer be able to like have the slide film right away, or did they have to get developed as well?
No, it was oftentimes even more lengthy time.
Oh,
because they were less popular than negatives.
Okay.
So, it was funny because all of my slide film and my negative film would go to Applebee's on, the name of the street escapes me, at the bottom of our city market.
Yeah, I'm not great with it. It's not Germain, is it? Is that Germain?
Probably Germain.
I live on Germain, so I should probably know this.
Yeah. So Applebee's camera stores were, and sometimes, they were fast, but sometimes you had to wait for a couple days. And that was very stressful, by the way, for when you're doing commercial jobs or advertising jobs, because you'd have not only do you have the stress of not knowing if the photo was good with an older camera, but you had to wait for sometimes 3 or 4 days and then look at the pictures and, what if there was a malfunction where you didn't wind the film, or what if they were all poorly exposed? You couldn't do anything about that. Mm-hmm. So I was an early adopter for digital, and I said, you know what? I can't, that level of stress, which all photographers have had to deal with all the way back to the late 1800s. I shouldn't be so lucky to have this new invention. But I really gravitated toward digital quickly.
Okay.
Simply because I knew that the digital camera with Photoshop would give me a far greater leeway with regards to my commercial work or my advertising photography.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so that triggered another memory in my mind. One of my few photography memories is when my band we were playing a show, I think in Toronto, and she said she was a photography student. She approached us to ask us if she could take pictures of us performing, just without our permission. She wanted our permission before she did that and use them in her class. And I remember she had a digital camera of some kind, and she was taking pictures as we were playing. And I noticed like she'd take a picture and look at it, take a picture and look at it. And I remember asking her afterwards, like, do you ever find when you're taking pictures and looking, like, what if while you were looking at the screen to confirm the picture's good, you missed a really interesting moment? Like, why would you ever just like snap a ton of pictures and then look at them afterwards? And kind of look on her face was like she hadn't really thought about that.
That's a very good point that you bring up. And it's entirely based on how much, I guess you would say, leeway you have with regards to what we call post-processing or the editing time. Mm-hmm. So if you think about the highest elite professional photographers are usually, the ones that are going to the Olympics, for example. Because they have a whole team of people to process their images and, they have assistants beside them, the assistants running the images into a computer while they're photographing the Olympic sport. They can just almost rapid fire, almost like a machine gun, just do thousands and thousands of photos. Now, if you're a one-person show, like, for example, a lot of wedding photographers, they get bogged down in sorting thousands of photos from a single wedding. I don't know too much about the wedding photography world, but I do know from what I hear from them is that a lot of the time suck, and it's not the wedding day usually that's the problem, but it's sorting through the thousands of images that the wedding photographer has taken on the wedding day. So you do indeed have to be a little bit selective with how much you do the rapid fire, mm-hmm. Because you're very conscious of how much time you're going to allot to the post-processing at the end of the shoot the next day.
Okay, that makes total sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, and again, as you're saying this, I'm like seeing all these parallels in music and even recording an interview, because you could edit an interview if you need to, like, it's fun to have a 2-hour conversation, but if you know the interview has to shrink down to 20 minutes, man, it can take a long time to edit that interview.
Exactly.
And maybe it's not quote unquote worth it to do it that way.
True.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So as you become more, what's the right word? Seasoned or successful, or the ratio between the time spent on editing, not necessarily by the photographer, but the time spent on post-production or processing mm-hmm. increases? So
it's an interesting dynamic, and a lot of, like, let's just use, for example, a trip to Japan. I go to Japan often, and I would say, maybe someone would say, "Hey, Mark, I hear that you just came back from your 1-week trip in Japan. You must have taken 1,000 photos." Now, they would say that, thinking that, yes, 1,000 photos would certainly be appropriate for a trip to Japan. And I would shock them by saying, actually, I took about 20. Because I've gotten to the point, and this is probably the case for all professional photographers, is that with about 90% certainty that picture is actually not going to work. It's going to be subpar, mediocre, or this picture is going to be amazing. So we're actually reducing the amount of photos that we take as we become more seasoned, and that's a very good word that you chose. Oftentimes because we have some sort of internal switch which tells us, tells our soul, I guess you would say, mm-hmm. that this is a worthwhile photo. Grab it, and that will be a winner. And I find that as I go on in the years as being a photographer, and it's been about 26 years or 27 years as a professional, that I take fewer and fewer photos as the years go on. But the nice thing is that those fewer and fewer photos are ones that I'm super proud of, and they're usually the ones that are considered objectively the best.
objectively the best by others.
People watching or
Reviewing. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And again, you hear the story in music, the same thing. Like people will do one or two. You could do 30, 40, 100 takes and edit it on your production studio, Pro Tools, whatever. And then sometimes you'll hear the people that said, I did this song, it came to me right away. I did 2 takes. We used the first take, and it's the most popular song I have.
Yeah.
So you hear this in art, I find time and time again.
Yes, exactly. And that makes perfect sense. And one thing, if there's any younger photographers who are listening to this and want to get into the temptation will be to take a massive amount of photos. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that is a normal progression where you're taking all of these photos and you're finding out what works and what doesn't. This is a good process. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that eventually you will be paring down that volume as time goes on, and that too is very natural.
Okay. Do you have any examples from photos you've taken, and I don't know if released is the right word, but put out into the world where you looked at the photo and technically there's a mistake in the photo, but based on a feeling, you have to decide not to care? And again, thinking about music, I would say like you might be recording a guitar solo and you technically hit a wrong note that's out of the scale and you hear that note, but the feeling of everything else is like you can't replicate it, so you say, I have to let this mistake is just part of it, even though it's technically a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a very, very good example, but first what I'll say is that that's rare to happen nowadays for the commercial or advertising side of the business, because Photoshop and Lightroom have a really impressive AI removal of any problem. So let's just say that there's a Coke can lying on the street, that you didn't see when you're doing a commercial shoot outside. Well, it's so easy to clean up. You can clean up a photo perfectly now, and it's so fast because of AI. Now, the answer is yes, and it happens frequently for this reason. One of my favorite genres is street photography, and most specifically travel street photography, so photographing in different cities around the world. I have an internal or a self-imposed ethic where I will not remove anything in a street photo. So I won't use any Photoshop clone stamping. I won't digitally remove that piece of garbage that's on the floor. What you see is what you get. Now, I will, of course, allow myself to flip the image to black and white because I love black and white. I will crop as much as I want. I will do tonal adjustments. That would be adjusting the brightness levels of the highlights, midtones, and shadows. But I don't delete anything. And that's just simply my own ethic, because I want the street photography to be pure in the sense that this is what you see, this is what you get. It's not prettied up. Often in street photography, we're dealing with urban environments that are actually quite graphic. They're not clean. They're not. Oftentimes, they're a little bit depressing if you're doing urban street photography. And I want that authentic grittiness to remain. So whenever I am, like, say, for example, if you saw my portfolio on my website, markhemmings.com, my favorite album, and the one that I think that comes up first, is the black and white street photography. And if you go through that, there's a ton of examples of things that if I was in the advertising world, I would have erased, or I would have, completely clone stamped with Photoshop. But that's not the case for street photography. So yes, there's a ton of examples of something that's not perfect. And I think that actually adds to the value of street photography. Perfection is good for advertising, but perfection is not good for creating art. Okay.
I have 2 questions. One, quickly, what is clone stamping?
Yes. Yep. So that's simply a technical term for erasing something in a photo.
Okay.
Yep.
And in that series you're talking about, I think anyway, there was a picture that stuck out to me. Was it was a woman in Japan, and the picture was blurry?
Yes, exactly.
And I remember, and that was kind of one of those like, wow, that must have been an intentional. I could imagine someone taking that picture and being like, oh, it's blurry. And I don't know how you set it up, obviously, but that was my first thought, is someone would have taken that picture and been like, oh, it's blurry. But then maybe the creative, the artist in you said, no, I'm going to keep it.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you bring that up. Most of the time it's planned. So we would say that is considered a slow shutter type photo. So what that means technically is when you slow the shutter down, that shutter is the opening and closing of the little flaps inside your camera. It allows you to have a blurry photo. And that blurriness can be used artistically, especially in street photography. It's really fascinating to have slow shutter speeds. One example is if you have a person waiting for a train, let's just say Tokyo subway, and then the train goes zooming by or is zooming by to slow down, but that person is still. If you slow the shutter speed down a little bit, the person will still remain sharp, but the train will be a blur, like this linear blur going left to right.
Okay.
It's actually quite beautiful. Now, there are times when it'll be a mistake, and that blurry person actually works. It's like, wow, what a gift. I didn't plan this, but it was a mistake that the shutter was open. Maybe I did a slow shutter an hour ago and I forgot to change the shutter speed. And I take a picture again and it was a failure, but I look at it and say, wait a minute, this is actually pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. That's cool. That's fascinating, actually. Yeah. I love when mistakes become art.
Yes.
Or something like that becomes
exactly.
Something that I do come back all the time, and pretty much everything in my life, not everything, but a lot in my life about like stuff being technically right and stuff just feeling good or feeling right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I wish I remembered the quote, but a famous French photographer, I think from the 1980s, but I could be wrong on this. I'll have to check on it. Said the difference between British photographers and French photographers is that British photographers look for perfection, analytical perfection in their photos, and Parisian photographers look for heart and soul. Okay. And I was thinking, well, that's probably true. I don't know much about British and continental photographers, but regardless, that quote stuck with me, obviously, until now. And I see that in me, in the sense that half of my photography would be the money-making side, which is advertising or commercial, and that needs to be the analytical, perfect exposure, perfect lines, perfect straightness. But the art photography, which usually for me would be the street photography, that is soul-based. So it's using metaphoric language, it's using poetic language, it's using, narrative. So I don't care about technical excellence in that side. So I have both of those elements within me when I'm photographing, and it's entirely dependent on the end use case.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So thinking about that, is that like, could you train, or I'll say train someone to be a commercial photographer, but the artistic photography side is something the person has to discover on their own?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Yeah,
I would suggest that, training for advertising and commercial work is much easier than training heart and soul type language, as we would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, it makes me think about music, learning music theory and technically how to construct a song, but then kind of like throwing out the rules and just feeling it out. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
Feel, what grabs your soul. How else would you say it? Metaphor, all of these things are things that are very hard to quantify. It's in fact, it's very hard to put language to it, because a piece of art, whether it be photography, painting, illustration, whatever, that largely comes from I would say, the heart and soul. And again, that type of origination, for lack of a better term, is very hard to explain.
It's that weird feeling when, now I'm not a huge art person, but I'll go into galleries every once in a while, and you walk through the gallery, and then all of a sudden, bam, you stop. Something about the painting or whatever is in front of you, that even though you walked by 20, you just stop and you just look at it, and you're like, I don't really know what's different, but I just want to sit here and look at this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the quote, what is it? You can't account for taste or something along those lines. It's like, why does that painting grab you and stop you, but the other one you couldn't care less, and you might think it's stupid, in fact. Yeah. But the person behind you is taken with that one that you. It's so. I'm grateful that I'm not within the larger art world, in the sense that it's required of me, because the amount of theory and the amount of even ethereal language that you need to come up with in order to effectively judge art, that's a task that is way beyond me. I'll tell you, being an art gallery owner, I would certainly not. It would be very difficult for me, because there's such a heavy weight of subjectivity, and I'm not sure that I'd be able to handle that.
It would be heavy.
Yeah.
Months ago now, I spoke with Christiana Myers. Do you know her? She's a curator. And anyway, I'd like to have her back just to talk more about that. We discussed a little bit about that on the interview, but also afterwards, I just had all these questions about how do people curate art and how does it like come up with these values, you know? And she had some interesting insights into it. So it is, because it's subjective, but there are slightly some objective things you can judge about art. Anyway, very fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So I know like one pursuit you're doing now is kind of combining like running or what's the right word? Ultra marathons, right?
Yes.
With your photography?
Yep.
So how does that like, because I know there's flow states involved with running and exercising and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of blend those? How do those worlds come together?
Yeah, it's a very interesting process. And for any of your listeners who don't know the terminology of running, usually the most popular types of runs, unless you're doing track and field, usually it's a 5 kilometer, so we would call it a 5K, and then people would jump up to like a half marathon, which would be around 21 kilometers, then a full marathon, which is 42 kilometers approximately, and then after that everything else is called ultramarathon. Now, an ultramarathon technically is anything beyond 42.2 kilometers, but usually a 50 kilometers or more is what's considered ultramarathon. And those can be done both on the road or on trail or in the mountains. And because, mentally speaking, anything beyond 50 kilometers is usually a little bit hard on the mind when you're running on the roads, it's more popular to do ultramarathon races or training in the woods, on the trails.
You're just talking about being visually engaged?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because as you can imagine, while I love road running, if you just keep going past these houses and it's ripping hot out and there's nothing but telephone wires above your head, it is soul crushing, to be honest. So that's why it tends, ultra marathoning, it tends to be more in the woods, on the trails. And I've done a number of them so far. The longest was 100 miles for a race in Cape Breton. That was last year. Or 160 kilometers for those who are kilometer based. And that took me 32 hours, I think. And that was my first one. And it was a great learning curve.
Straight? 32 hours straight?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you stop to go to the bathroom, you stop to briefly to eat, or if you need to change your shoes or whatever.
Okay.
But in any case, just a couple of years ago, I started to get into trail running. And we have a very good group here in St. John called the St. John Trail Running Group. And our mutual friend Colin has something similar in Sussex, which is nice. And so anyway, I found out that for my age, I'm 51. For my age, I'm a pretty good trail runner.
Okay.
And a fairly good marathon runner as well, I probably. And I also love photography. I also love Japan, and I love different countries. So what I decided to do with a partner in Mexico is to offer an adventure where we're going to be running through various parts of Japan and also hiking up Mount Fuji, staying overnight on the top of Mount Fuji, doing a run around the crater rim, and then running down the other side the next day. So it should be a fun adventure. And that's coming up this September.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And so if you're running in a timed race, would you be combining photography with that too? Or
interesting. The answer is dependent on the length of the race. So for example, if the race is 50 kilometers or more, then I will bring my phone and I will definitely take video and photos.
Okay.
If the race is marathon or quicker, so my marathon time is 3 hours, 9 minutes, for example. I feel that getting out my phone is just going to cost too much time. In fact, I don't even bring my phone for fast runs like that. But longer ones that are going to be like 5 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours or whatever, then yes, there's plenty of time for you to get out your phone, lean against a tree if it's dark out to make sure that it's a good solid picture. And I love doing that. In fact, it actually breaks up some of the pain or, because trail running, it does get painful after a while. It's aching, you have aching joints and so on. And I find that adding photography to those races or even those long training runs is really, really exciting. And it sort of feeds your soul.
Okay. Yeah. Do you find you take different kinds of pictures depending on how strained you feel?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, by all means. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, if you're doing a race, like an ultra race, a lot of the times your brain becomes, for lack of a better term, mushy. And I know that if, probably a lot of the listeners haven't done too much running, but they'll appreciate the same feeling if they skipped a night of sleep. Like maybe they're shift workers or something, and for some reason, family, that when your brain is deprived of sleep, that mushy feeling is something that us ultra runners get pretty much every race. And there's many things that you try to do to try to avoid that. One is consuming, enough calories, which is often hard. But you want to get that glucose, fructose, as much of that into your mind as possible. Some fats, but yeah, often the creativity will suffer because my mind is not working perfectly when you're at like hour 8, running in the mountains or whatever.
Okay. Can it flip the other way, where because you're so tired, you're being less critical, but then you end up with better, quote unquote, better shots?
It certainly can.
It can happen that way?
Yeah, and no one knows what'll happen.
Yeah.
It's a complete, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
And but that's the nice thing about photography is, one, you don't know what you're going to encounter, and you have no idea how you'll be feeling at that time. And a lot of the times we just have to say, I feel terrible, so I'm not going to photograph. We have to actually force yourself to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because interestingly, photography is therapeutic on its own. So you might feel exhausted, but actually, stopping to take a picture of something that you find interesting, whether it be a beautiful flower or a bird on a tree or a chipmunk, whatever, that can actually feed you for another mile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Keep you motivated.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there is something, it is motivating when you fight through the urge to procrastinate or be lazy or not do what you think or know you should be doing. And then once you actually do it, you get going, you're like, man, I'm so happy I did that.
Yes, exactly.
It's common in music where tons of successful musicians, if you read their books or you read their suggestions, they always say, like, don't wait for inspiration, just pick up your guitar or hit record on Pro Tools and just start frigging around. Mm-hmm. And you'll never know, but if you wait for inspiration, you might never really end up with anything.
It's true.
Just kind of go through the slog sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Most people, think about running a little bit more here. In my mind anyway, like people would associate consuming a bunch of calories before doing exercise as like something that would bog you down. Mm-hmm. So when you said it's hard to get enough calories,
yeah,
I guess that just feels strange to me, not knowing anything about the world.
It's true. And I'll give you while I never took any biology in school. I actually went here to UMBSJ, as you know, and none of everything that I know has been through experience, both probably mostly failures. But in any case, when we are running, and it doesn't matter if it's road or trail, we are constantly in a caloric deficit. So what that means is that, let's just say that we burn 400 calories or 500 calories per hour when we're running. Okay, I don't know if that's exact. And by the way, that's different for each person. But usually we can only comfortably consume about 300 calories per hour. Now, when I say that, it means that in your stomach, you will be able to process 300 calories per hour, and anything that's beyond that is going to sit in your stomach and bounce around. So as a runner, you're going to want to get as close to that 300 calories per hour as you can to avoid the extra non-digested food to be bouncing around in your stomach, because that causes nausea, it causes bloating, and it makes you feel terrible. So it's a bit of a biological science that is mostly objective but somewhat subjective, where we try to avoid any opportunity for nausea. And oftentimes it's a battle, because we do need to eat. We do certainly need to bring in calories, but often it's not enough. And it's especially not enough if you, for example, do get sick and you have to vomit just from overexertion. It's almost impossible to get back from that. So usually when we're running, we tend to want to avoid fats and proteins when it's a marathon run or quicker, and we just want pure sugar. Now, when I say pure sugar, that also includes gels that are made up of glucose and fructose or maltodextrin. Pure, the running gels that you can buy, they're just pretty much sugar bombs. And because there's no fats or proteins within those, it goes straight to the veins, as it were. Okay. That energy goes straight to your muscles. It goes straight, works in the liver. Now, you would add slight amounts of fats and proteins only during ultramarathons, when you're going slower but steadier. And then your body can actually consume and digest a bit more of the fats and proteins, which often are useful for mood. You don't technically need fats or proteins doing an ultramarathon, but it does certainly help your mood especially when you're on the back end of an ultramarathon that's very long. You get sugared out, essentially, and you do need to have like say, for example, a bar that has some protein and fats. Okay.
Now, is that for mouthfeel, or is that just how it feels in your stomach?
Excellent question. It's mouthfeel. It's your emotions. Say, for example, like I really like Dutch stroopwafels. Now, those are those thin waffles that you can buy. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, they're thin. They have a little bit of molasses or something in the middle. They have a certain degree of fats in them. They have just the smallest amount of protein. And I would use those for anything like an ultramarathon or more. I wouldn't use them for a marathon, just because of the emotional hit and the comfort that comes from eating something that is not just pure sugar.
Okay.
So yes, it's about mouthfeel. It's about, how does this food, do you have a history of this food making you feel good? Yeah. So it's a fun sport in the sense that you get to eat. If there's anything that you feel is off limits because you might find it fattening or something, if you can eat it, you eat it. And it could be the most junk food that you ever want. As long as it stays down, then in the ultramarathon you can consume it.
Okay. That's interesting. So I've struggled with my weight my whole life, and I'm sure there's listeners out there who struggle with weight too, and I bet all of them are thinking like, emotional eating is my biggest problem. Like, that's how it happens. You get attached to emotional eating.
The crazy irony is that there at some kilometer mark during our ultra marathons, it's like, this is my favorite food, and I desperately don't want to eat it. Like, I'm so sick of eating this. But you know what? You would like I love oatmeal raisin cookies. I could eat 1 million of them. But sometimes you just get your body is just so broken down during an ultra marathon that even thinking of that wonderful cookie just makes you feel a little bit off. So The answer is yes. You can eat anything you want, and it doesn't matter as long as it stays down. Those calories are necessary.
Okay. But in a marathon world, it's kind of like high calorie but low volume. Is that kind of what you're searching for?
So marathon, you want a high amount of just what we would call sucrose or glucose fructose.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's the sugars.
Okay.
And you don't want any protein. You don't want any fats.
Okay.
And that is why the gels, sometimes people call them goos. Those gels are very popular for marathon or quicker because it's instant energy. Like I said, it goes straight to your muscles. It's easy to digest, and I think it's packable. You can put them in your running pockets very easy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I found interesting is after my interview with Colin, he let me try on a pair of, I think he called them super shoes.
Yeah.
Are you up or hip to like shoe technology?
Yep.
Because when I wore those, I have flat feet, so I wear special orthopedic insoles, and I always have.
Mm-hmm.
And those felt so good, like kind of like helped me propel forward a little bit.
It's true.
Now he told me they usually wear down quicker than most other shoes.
Yep.
But is shoe technology something you're kind of like into or know anything about?
Yeah, certainly. So what Colin was referring to are shoes that have a special type of plate inside them, and this plate is of different sizes depending on the company that manufactures them. But all the major running brands have plated super shoes. Often they're made of carbon fiber, but they can be made of other material as well. And they allow a certain amount of forward propulsion. Now, interestingly, that forward propulsion is both objectively and subjectively beneficial in the marathon or half marathon. But they're terrible for lateral movement because they're not meant for turning corners. So, for example, I have a pair of Adidas super shoes for my marathon. They're called the Adizero Adios Pro 3. And when I first tried them on, I went for a run in them, moving forward, and they felt crazy. It's like wearing springs. But when I turned the corner, it was like I almost fell because they're not meant for turning corners. They're meant for going straight, or at least a very gentle curve. And I was thinking, my goodness, this is very interesting technology that works, but you will never use these on trails, at least the road running versions. And they're pretty much meant for that speedy marathon. Now, trail running shoes, there are some companies that make the plates, but it's a debate that I'm not even sure if it's worth having plated trail running shoes. Some people love them. Some people find they don't work.
Okay. But they're not, I think Colin might have mentioned this, but I just can't remember if at some point, were they ever deemed as being like an unfair advantage?
Yes.
They were, okay.
Yeah, they're not anymore. Everyone has them.
Everyone has them now.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So it used to be kind of like
Yep.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So makes me think of corked bats in baseball for some reason. I don't really know why that came to mind. But.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
That's very interesting. So shoes, I mean, that's obviously a huge part of running. So people have to keep up on their shoe advancements, I guess.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
One thing I would like to keep in mind for everybody listening, though, is that I and everyone else wants the barrier to entry in running to be as small as possible, because I wouldn't want anyone to not try running because they don't have a super shoe.
Mm-hmm.
Running is a fantastic thing to do, especially for things like mental health, physical health. You don't need those $300 pair of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
No, just get anything. In fact, you can even buy used semi-professional shoes for super cheap. But yeah, make sure that everyone knows that the barrier to entry to this sport is very, very cheap, very inexpensive, and everyone should, if they want to, give it a go.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up because it made me want to. I did want to talk about. With artists, like with photography, and it happens with music too, the self-gatekeeping people do when they think they don't have the right, whatever that word means, gear.
Yeah.
Or they don't have enough gear, or they don't have this toy to get things rolling. Yeah. And I know you have opinions on that.
Yeah, I certainly do.
So I wouldn't mind hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's especially in photography. So, for example, I do have professional gear for my advertising and commercial photography. That's normal and to be expected. But for everything else, I don't ever use professional gear. So my travel photography, my street photography, it's all with what we call it consumer grade cameras, off the shelf. And a lot of it actually even is with my iPhone. So I feel that it's very important that young photographers never fall into the trap of feeling less than if they have gear that is not professional. In fact, I don't even think it's necessary, because consumer cameras, consumer lenses, and the higher level, which is called prosumer, the middle grade, they are so good these days that I don't even think it's necessary to buy, $3,000, $5,000, $6,000 professional cameras. I don't think anyone should do that unless they have income to balance that out. Income from photography, for example. So I would say, just never feel that you are not going to be able to enter because of finances. You should definitely, work within your budget. Don't go into debt to buy gear, but just use what you have. And then when you've maxed out the gear that you have to the extent that you feel that you're being left behind because you're advancing at a faster rate, then you can think about upgrading to the next level of gear. And it's very similar in the sport of running or trail running and so on, is that you can spend a lot of money, as you can in the world of music. But often heart and soul is more important.
That's the most important ingredient or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, are there moments where there's an exception to that rule where maybe it increases your workflow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, and that would in my sort of dualistic type photography scenario, if I'm doing this for a client, I want speed, I want efficiency, so I will pay money for the right gear, the right editing software, a fast Apple computer, all of that. Yes, totally. But on the artistic side, you don't have the pressure of a client. You don't have the pressure of getting the image out the door as quick as possible. So if you're not working as a professional photographer, I'll be honest, you don't even need all that level of efficiency, which costs money. The greater efficiency comes with a greater cost. That means a faster processor for your computer, a potentially faster camera, and all that stuff. But if you're doing photography as art, which I hope everyone is doing, then there's almost no need to stay up on the latest and greatest. Use what you have, because if it's art, you shouldn't be under a time frame anyway.
Mm-hmm. I think everyone could relate to taking a picture with their smartphone. I know you've written a couple books on photography with smartphones, but even people who don't even think about doing photography artistically, they've probably used their smartphone to take a picture and been like, damn, this could be in a magazine.
Oh, yeah. And indeed it could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And it's similar to music. You can buy an $80 USB microphone, plug it into your computer, and just start recording.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend $500 on this and $600 on that and take these courses doing this,
Yeah. Yeah. We want to encourage people. Like, I only really know about photography and running. But in any genre of art, science, hobbies, anything like that, it's very important that you just start it. And, make sure that you surround yourself with people who don't push you to buy more. Because that's a financial roadblock that will really destroy your creativity. If you're in debt because of gear, then you're going to feel a sense of panic, or at least some negative feeling, because you're still paying off this item. That I do feel that your creativity will suffer. It's an ironic flip around where we don't want that situation. So that's why often I'll say just buy used. For example, no doubt, in your world of music, there might be like a Facebook used group or something where you can buy used gear. Well, there is certainly that in photography. There's a maritime Facebook group where everyone puts their used gear up. You can buy used stuff, and I think that's really good. You know, for example, a used camera lens. Camera lenses do not lose their value. Now, a camera body can, because older technology is worth a little bit less because camera sensors are always evolving. But a camera lens, that can stay relevant for a decade or more. So there's no need to buy new if you're first starting out in photography. Buy used. Mm-hmm. You know, just make sure that you stay within your budget. And when you're within your budget, you're going to feel that the creative muscles are able to flex far greater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pro buy used as well. And circling back to music, like most of my guitars, I only own a few guitars, because I consciously tried to avoid becoming a gear person, because I just didn't want to go down the path you're kind of talking about. Mm-hmm. But holding a used instrument, and especially when you can see that there's like markings on the frets and stuff, knowing that it was used and played and loved, it feels like it's worked in or worn in. And just to me personally, it feels more enjoyable to purchase and hold a used instrument. I don't really know why. It's just a feeling.
I agree. Yeah, I agree completely. And also, if you were to anthropomorphize that guitar, meaning to place human characteristics on it, isn't it nice that it didn't go to the dump?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That makes me think of this used guitar. I bought an acoustic guitar for like $60, but the frets, you could see the scales. Like, this person was a blues player.
Okay.
And you could tell whoever had this acoustic guitar played the blues out of this thing. And who knows why it ended up in the pawn shop. Maybe it was a person who had it his whole life and passed away, or he or she passed away. Who knows? But as soon as I felt the guitar and hit it, and it sounded like pretty good, but just the feeling of like, wow, someone played the hell out of this thing.
Yes.
Yeah, very cool. Plus, when you surround yourself with stuff you're not using too, that can create that shame as well. Even if you're not in debt, you're surrounded by stuff you're not using, you might feel that, and it clouds your creativity, kind of like what you're saying.
I think so. I think minimalism is important in many aspects of life, and having a minimalistic viewpoint, even just the smallest amount, I think the decluttering really does help your emotional state. Yeah,
the decluttering, less on your mind. What's that classic saying? If you acquire too much stuff, like the stuff ends up owning you. You don't own the stuff.
Yeah, so true. Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, and it's because I have a Fibonacci sequence pin on my hat here, is the rule of thirds.
Yeah.
Like, that comes up all the time. There's a few mixing engineers in the audio world who, it's one of the few secrets in audio mixing engineering that people won't give away anymore.
Okay.
Because like mixing engineers used to be pretty secretive, but now with YouTube and all that, people tend to give away their secrets. But there's a few famous mixing engineers who claim to have implemented the rule of thirds into the way they balance, what's in the left channel, what's in the right channel, and the way they cut and boost frequencies.
Yeah.
Now, I know visually the rule of thirds is way, what's the right word? I mean, it's like more discussed. It's probably like something you would learn in, would it be considered like an introductory lesson when you first began?
Yep.
Do you mind just kind of like overall, or just kind of big picture explaining the rule of thirds?
Of course. So the rule of thirds, if you envision, let's just, for your listeners, let's think of a horizontal photo that you got printed out. And that horizontal photo, it could be a snapshot or anything like that. And just envision a tic-tac-toe grid being placed on that horizontal photo. Now, what's going to happen is, because the photo is not a square, it is going to be a little bit of a stretched tic-tac-toe grid. Okay? That's normal.
Okay.
And that tic-tac-toe grid does a number of things. It's also, by the way, in every iPhone and every Android. And also, if desired, within every modern Nikon, Canon, Sony larger camera.
You're talking like a grid overlay?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And that grid overlay helps you to compose images that are classically appealing. Now, I'll get into that in a second, but what I'll first do is just explain this grid. So we have the tic-tac-toe grid. That means that we have two horizontal lines that we have a bottom third, a middle third, and a top third. We're all horizontal. And we also have 2 vertical lines. And so on the left, you would have a vertical chunk of the picture, and the middle vertical chunk of the picture, and then on the right, we would have a vertical chunk or section of the picture. And this tic-tac-toe grid is extremely good for landscapes, because you can put the ground part of the landscape on the bottom third, you can put the ocean on the top middle third, and you can put the sky on the top third. So this is be a classically appealing way to photograph a landscape. And you may say, well, what about the verticals? Well, you can do the exact same thing if there's a tree, for example. You can put the tree so it goes along one of the vertical lines. Also, the intersecting points of the 4 intersecting points of this grid is actually a good place to put the subject matter. So the rule of thirds grids is a really great way to learn how to compose a picture. And by the way, if you're using an iPhone, and if you want to add your grid to your camera, all you have to do is go to Settings, which is that little gray icon that looks like a gear. And then within Settings, you're going to go to Camera. And then within Camera, you're going to tap Grid, and you're going to tap it on. So anyone who's listening, if you want to follow along with that, and that will allow this rule of thirds grids to be on your iPhone whenever you take a picture. It's very effective. Now, if you're an Android user, it's much easier. Within your camera app, you're just going to go to Settings, which is that little gray icon, and you're going to go to Grid, or I think in different Androids it has a different language. It might be something like Composition Help or something. In any case, you're going to see it really easily. And I do suggest that all of your listeners do that for both iPhone and Android, because they're going to find it much easier to compose their pictures using those grids. Now, the history of the grid, or the rule of thirds, is very interesting, and I do believe, I could be mistaken, but it was the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle who first came up with the rule of thirds. Now, he did it a little bit differently, where the rule of thirds grid would be, he would call it the golden mean. And that's where the Fibonacci, there's a relation between the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean. His version was a little bit more compressed than the perfect tic-tac grid that we see in our iPhone or Android today. But he was very, very smart, obviously a smart philosopher. And a lot of our art theory actually comes from Aristotle. And so if you take art theory class at college or university or something, you will certainly study his contribution to the world of art.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. You almost became a philosophy teacher or educator, didn't you?
So here at UMBSJ, I graduated in 1996 with a Bachelor of Philosophy. A Bachelor of Arts, majoring in philosophy. And my assumption was I would go on to become a professor, to get my doctorate in philosophy.
Okay.
Interestingly, that didn't happen because my graduating year, 1997, 1 year after graduation, I was hired to go to Japan to bring ESL students, or English as a second language students, from Japan to here, to UMBSJ, for a very early version of their ESL programs. And when I was in Japan for 5 weeks, which was a wonderful job, I took my first pictures with my grandfather's Nikon camera. And when I got back, the photos were really good, at least relative to not knowing how to use a camera. And immediately that became my career. And I first got my first job because of a friend of mine, Andrew Tidby, who asked me if I could work on a Hollywood movie that just came into town, working as a stills photographer.
Okay.
So, yeah. So UMBSJ, Japan, sort of the origin story. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to think more about the philosophy thing and the rule of thirds just a bit, but I'm also curious about when you accepted that gig. Was that a difficult thing to say yes to? and when I say that, because sometimes when someone is presented with an opportunity like that, they may feel like they're not prepared, or they're not good enough, or they're not worthy, and so they might mess up their chances to pursue their career. But then other folks would just say, just say yes, just say yes and do it. Anyway, I'd just be kind of curious.
It's true. And in this instance, because I came fresh off of this success in Japan, I had too much of that youthful hubris and ego. And I said, of course I could work in the Hollywood movie industry. In fact, I'll be the best stills photographer ever. Of course I wasn't, but I had that it was the exact opposite for me.
Okay.
Being a young photographer who thought that he was the very best.
Yeah, like, of course I'll do it because you're lucky to have me.
Exactly, yeah.
So every once in a while, the ego can get you in the right direction.
Sometimes you can.
Sometimes it can,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But going back to the rule of thirds, it's interesting how deep that goes back to Greek philosophy. And the rule of thirds is like, and it's probably kind of like symmetry on a face. It's like someone who's looking at a photo who doesn't know any of this would be attracted to a photo that is following these rules, but they wouldn't be able to identify the rules, and it's just some sort of weird feeling that happens in the human mind. It's like strange.
Yes, and I do believe that generational training of the mind actually is a real thing. So, for example, because we are trained from birth, and our previous generations, like our parents, grandparents, and so on, we've now been trained for X amount of centuries that it's very pleasing for a rectangular image, whether it be a painting, a drawing, or a photograph, that it follows the rule of thirds principles. Now, in saying that, the anarchist would say, the art anarchist would say, I don't want to follow any rules. And I would say, yeah, good. As long as you know them, then you can break them. But make sure that you know the theory first, and then feel free to do the purposeful breaking of the rules. Now, in street photography, it's interesting because we don't care about the rules. In fact, sometimes it's detrimental to follow the rules in street photography. And that, by the way, that's the same with non-commercial fashion photography, and even sometimes commercial fashion photography. The rules are something that we want to break, because we need to get the eyeballs on the work, and often creating a sense of tension is very good for getting attention to our images. So breaking the rules produces in the viewer a sense of tension. Sometimes that tension could also be a sense of unease or fear. For example, if I don't watch horror movies, but if you look at a movie poster for a horror movie, I guarantee you it's not going to be pleasing. It's not going to be following the rule of thirds. It's meant to create tension. Mm. That photographer knows that, right? So that photographer is creating an image that will actually produce the desired effect, which is fear, intimidation, sometimes depression. Anything that they want, they will compose their image for that desired effect. Mm-hmm. And that's either on the pleasant side by following the rule of thirds, or if you want the opposite effect, you'll disobey the rule of thirds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very cool. Yeah, again, it makes me think of music where sometimes, like, I can clearly remember a moment where me and the band I was in, we recorded a song, and there's just this one note where I was playing a fret down from the guitar player who's playing a chord the next fret up. And you listen to it, you'd be like, and I knew this was happening myself, but it was like, because I played the bass note, and I was like, man, this sounds really cool, and everyone thought it sounded cool, until like we were rehearsing it, and we were playing it together, and it's like, oh, you're playing that note wrong. Yeah. It's like, is it wrong though? Because like when we listen to it, doesn't it sound cool? Like, right. Doesn't it sound interesting and neat? Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of one of those subjective things, but that's pretty fascinating.
So true.
So tension in photography, and that's not really something I would think about, really, building tension in a photograph.
Yeah, it's a little bit, when I say advanced, I don't want to sound high and mighty, but I do believe that is a type of photography that you're going to get into in your later years of maybe at least 5 years into your journey as a photographer, because I do believe that it's very important to get the foundations of beauty and composition and that traditional or classical way of creating an image that is pleasing to the viewer. Get those foundations, and then a number of years down the road, then you start on the more gritty path of purposely breaking those rules.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Another thought just kind of popped in my head is like, so you're taking the picture. I'm assuming most photos would have like subject matter, so you might see that person or that building or that tree that you want to zone in on. Is there any thought to how you control the viewers? What's the right way to say that? Like the movement around the picture. Control do you try to predict? Okay, they're going to look at the left corner. You know what I mean? Like, how does that come into play?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And usually the technical term that photographers use is called leading line.
Leading line. Okay.
Yeah. So essentially what photographers, and by the way, this is the exact same for painters and illustrators and anyone who's creating two-dimensional art and actually three-dimensional art probably. But what we're trying to do is create a composition where the viewer has a very clear and unmistakable path to follow throughout the picture space. So let's think of, for example, a good example here for us who live in St. John is what's it called? The harbor path. What's our path called? The harbor.
Is it the harbor path? I'm not good at pathway. I'm not sure. I'm not good with these names.
Yes. Anyway, for those who are outside of St. John, we have, I should know it.
Harbor Passage?
Yes. I'm sorry. Harbor Passage.
There it is. Yeah.
So the Harbor Passage could be straight, but it's not. Did you ever notice that?
Yeah, I guess I never noticed that it could be straight, but as soon as you say that, it's obviously could just be like under the bridge and just straight.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have been. Huh. But why did the landscape architect choose to do curves instead? What do you think?
I mean, this was the first time I thought about it, but I mean, it makes it more interesting.
Exactly. So whenever we have a situation where we know everything that's going to go on, where we see clearly down to the end, we do not have our imaginations activated. However, if we have a curved path through the woods or a curved path through a painting that we can't see the end, or at least there's some traveling involved that's not straight, the imagination is activated. This is a purposeful forcing of the imagination, and it also serves as a really good way to keep the interest levels high. So if we're walking through the Harbor Passage right now, you and I, and we're chatting, and it's a straight line, we are going to run the risk of being bored. If we have curves and we can't actually see straight down to the end, then there will always be the what would you call it? The good nervousness of having no idea what's around the corner. Is what's around the corner. Could be a dog with rabies. It could be someone who is kindly offering up water on a hot day. We have no idea what's going to happen around that gentle curve. And that is what allows our imaginations to be activated, which in turn provides for a pleasing photo, a pleasing walk in the park, a pleasing, adventure. And in photography, we're always looking for a way, not always, but oftentimes we're looking for a way for our composition to allow the viewer to go through the picture space in a way that we want. So if I take a picture, for example, of the Harbor Passage, and we have that nice winding S curve throughout, the person's going to actually be following that S curve of the orange that's not orange, it's sort of a reddish pavement. And it's going to be a very pleasing journey for the viewer to sort of pretend walk through the picture space. This is what art does when it follows traditional or classical art theory, is it allows the viewer to go through the picture space and enjoy going through it.
Okay. That took me right back to being a child, where like on the block I grew up grew up on. I had friends kind of in multiple places, like block away, 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away, but we were all pretty tight. And it's like, of course, as a kid, you could walk on the sidewalk and go to the person's house, but it was so much more fun to like take the random path through the woods, the trees behind the neighbor's house, and end up where you were going. And, sometimes mix it up just because, I don't know, I guess now when I think about it as a kid, you don't know what you're going to come across.
It's absolutely correct.
That's so interesting.
And that is the perfect example of how art, one of many, art has many values, but one of them is to create a sense of mystery and intrigue. And there's no mystery in you going to your friend's house on the sidewalk. But there is mystery by going around this little path with trees and bushes. You have no idea what's going to happen. A monster could jump out at you as a child, right? So that's a very good example of what we're talking about in art theory.
Interesting. Okay, that's really fascinating. Okay, that's really neat. Has there ever been moments, I know we've been talking for like over an hour. You're still good?
Still good.
Okay. I do go live at 3, so at some point I'll have to pull the trigger. But or maybe we should just go live. Has there ever been a moment where, thinking back to the balance between the art and the being the technician, where you've spent and you've spent so much time lining up the technical aspects of it that you've like lost the plot, like you've forgotten why you were even going to take this picture?
Yes. Yeah. And that usually is the case for any technical scenario that does require a high degree of technical understanding. So, for example, a good idea or a good example would be doing something like complicated time lapses, which are a series of photos taken over like many hours or many days, or doing technical long exposures, like maybe up to an hour of a waterfall, for example, or stars. So anything that requires a high degree of technical understanding with regards to the camera, because there's stress involved with that, it does sometimes rob your joy. Now, I'll give a real world example. I once had wanted to do a time lapse of the Milky Way. So I set my camera up for a 6-hour long exposure in the darkest part of the night. And I wanted to get this beautiful sweeping, star trail situation. And then it was very stressful because I was actually using a motorized machine to move with the stars. And then I felt something unease. Like I say, I don't have experience with this. Something doesn't feel right. And then in the morning when I checked the camera, the whole thing was a complete disaster because I didn't realize that in the north here, we have a problem with condensation. And my lens was filled with dew. The whole thing was ruined. In fact, I only had about 1 hour of this time lapse, because when I went to bed in the tent, that's when the dew started to come. So I something in me knew that there was something that was not going to work here, and that did steal my joy for the whole day. And of course, I should have just shut that off. Said, "Oh, it's a learning experience. I can try it again some other time." But when you put a lot of investment into something and it doesn't turn out, then that's a hard pill to swallow. And that does happen quite frequently to photographers, and it's something you just have to guard yourself with.
Just go with it.
Yeah.
Just eventually, once the emotions pass, just treat it as a learning experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. But do you think that maybe that's something? Now that's an obvious example, because there's like the picture is technically ruined, let's say.
Yeah.
But do you think maybe people have that happen to them time and time again and they don't notice it? Like they've lined up the perfect shot and it's just like a one-time click shot and they're never satisfied with their pictures? Do you think that's ever an issue?
I have met many people who are never satisfied with their images.
Okay.
And oftentimes a quick fix is just learn to become a better editor.
Okay.
Yep. So what I like to do is and by the way, this happens to me frequently because as a photo workshop instructor internationally, whenever we're in different countries and I help my students, they'll say, all of my photos are bad. And I look at them and say, well, no, it's just that you need to crop the left-hand side out. You need to adjust the contrast. The saturation needs to be a touch more. And then look at the photo. It's amazing. And they'll agree with me. So the art of editing is sometimes 50% of the image. Now, someone will say, well, I can't afford Photoshop. Well, don't worry. Just use Apple Photos, or if you're using an Android, just use Google Photos. It's almost as good, and you can still just get almost the same thing. And so what I like to do is to also make sure that my photo workshops have a certain degree of editing time, if possible, and because I like to make sure that people know that the whole process of art is not, the art of photography is not done after you take the picture. You can do so many great things in editing, and you don't need an expensive app. In fact, what you have for free is already on your iPhone or Android.
Okay, so don't dismiss editing, or don't throw away the photo until maybe you've played around with editing to see how it makes you feel.
Yeah, and find someone, if you still are not satisfied, find someone who's a little bit more experienced and sit down with them, buy them a coffee at a local cafe, and just get them to show you how they would edit that photo.
Okay.
And you'll probably be quite amazed. You just need sometimes a friend to give you a few ideas.
Okay. One thing I like doing on my phone when I snap a picture is I'll just start randomly zooming in, with my thumbs. And then once I'll just wait till it feels like a picture I like, and then I'll move it around, a little bit, like, maybe, and I am kind of aware of the rule of thirds, so maybe I'll put the face of my child like up here or whatever.
Yeah.
And when I like it, I just take a screenshot.
Yeah, sure.
And then now I've had, like, instead of cropping it, I've been able to do this funny little editing and just trust your gut. And you're like, well, I like this photo now. I don't know.
Yeah, and interestingly, like back in the day, that the screen, like when I say back in the day, I mean 4 years ago and earlier, the quality would not have been there. But these days, because any phone that's 4 years old or earlier has a fairly high resolution on the screen, so doing screen captures like that, no problem. In fact, most of the time, our images, like I would say, I could be wrong, but let's just say 90% of the time, all photos that we do are shown to the public via their own iPhone or Android. And because it looks good on your screen, it'll look good on their screen. And by the way, Facebook photos and Instagram photos, they are often slightly less resolution than your screen itself. So there's no problem.
It's another exact parallel to music, where you're sitting in a studio that's with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gear, and then at the very end, the mastering engineer or the mixing engineer will listen to it on iPhone or Android speakers.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an MP3.
Yes.
But they need to know that the mix sounds good on that.
Right.
And so you've taken this maybe $1 million facility and pumped it into a $400 phone with a $5 speaker.
Wow.
And, but honestly, 80% of the people are going to hear it that way.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
You'll have the high fidelity version, of course, for the people that want it, but you still kind of have to check and make sure that it's good on this,
Yeah, that reminds me, like, I have like only 2% of the knowledge of music that you do, but I recall early, like I used to, when I was a young snowboarder, I would listen to Metallica to get me amped up. And before, like their earlier records, before they had the new producer, I forget his name, but
Bob Rock.
I think so, yes. The earlier records, they said in an interview that we mixed all of our records for the sake of our target market, which is often teenage boys who are listening to our music through a cheap ghetto blaster.
Yep.
And they purposely downgraded some of their recording, some of their mixing, to not be super delineated, but to just to sound good for cheap gear, because oftentimes their target market wouldn't be able to afford anything more than one of those ghetto blasters.
Yeah, that's a smart move. I mean, if that's how the majority of the folks are going to be consuming it, then like it should sound good in the way that it's mostly consumed. That's a good example. Yeah. Okay. Another thing maybe we can briefly touch on. So when I used to work a day job before I got back into kind of the creative creative world. And one thing creative folks tend to struggle with is like, it's fun to talk about the art and the way it makes you feel and everything, but there's especially if you want to make a career out of it, there's always the moment where you need to start doing administration.
Yes.
And you do at some point have to start tracking the money.
Yeah.
So I would tell myself like, okay, Mondays are administrative Mondays. Tuesday to Friday, I can play guitar, I can fart around, I can edit, I can record. But Mondays, I just got to open up the spreadsheet, or I got to send those emails, or I got to look up those grant applications.
Yeah.
Is it like that in the world of photography or visual arts?
And
is it a struggle? I mean, it must be a struggle.
Yep. Yeah. It certainly is. And that's why every young photographer who is wanting to become a professional should also take a basic business course. I really, really encourage that. Now, what I do, and I think this helps me a lot, is I start my day every morning at Catapult Cafe to do my emails, get them out of the way, and then I go and do whatever I have to do. So to set my day up with a morning espresso, getting my emails done at outside of my office at the cafe, I see people I meet every day, have a nice chat. I love the baristas. That is something that works for me to get my admin stuff done, or basic accounting before I send it to my accountant every month. And the reality is there that a good chunk of my time is business related, admin related, emails, marketing, and that's just the way it is to be a professional. But I find it much easier to just get out of, to shake up the morning, go, be in a place where there's other people, and it just works much better.
In the beginning, did you ever have that kind of like, I would call it punk rock attitude, where it's kind of like, I don't need to do that.
Yep.
I'm just doing the art.
Yeah, and that doesn't exist.
It doesn't work, right?
Doesn't exist.
Doesn't work long term.
No.
Unless you're so successful quickly enough that you can just pass that to someone else to do.
Yeah.
Like you can hire someone completely to take care of all of that, and they're not going to rip, and you trust them not to rip you off.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone really makes that transition overnight. So there will be a transition time where, even though you're getting bigger and more successful, you still have to do a lot of the admin stuff, because the person who you just hired for minimum wage or something has no idea what an accounts receivable is. So I don't think that any artist ever goes from to immediately having a full team to look after everything. In fact, a lot of if you even think of the Rolling Stones or any of the musicians who are actually highly invested in running their own business, they're doing business stuff maybe even more than 50% of actually playing music. They're running a successful business. They're dealing with clients who need to pay them. They're making sure that no one is ripping them off. So I would say that I think that every artist should also realize and come to terms with the fact that they're also in a business. Yeah.
And there's no, shame's not the right word, but there's no, you're not compromising your art by taking care of the business.
You're supporting your art.
You're supporting it. You're probably making it stronger.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because there's confidence that comes from knowing where the pennies are going,
Yeah.
Where the dollars, where they're coming and going, and how they're being allocated.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And there's nothing, we hear of terrible stories, like the Japanese baseball player, I forget his name, who had his assistant just took millions and millions of dollars from him.
Recently, right? Otani?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. And there's so many examples of that, I'm sure, in the music world, where managers would just steal, and it's a real shame. And it's hard to put the blame on the person, on the victim, because oftentimes they have so much going on. It's very hard for them to also have their hand in checking in the financial side of things. It's not. It'll never be easy being an artist business person. It'll never be easy, but the rewards are there. You just have to realize that you have to get your hands into the admin stuff once in a while.
Yeah, and I think in music anyway, I think it happens often when someone does kind of like get their big break somewhat unexpectedly or a little quicker than they realize it, and it's just almost impossible to learn enough in the moment, so you're just trusting your manager or the record exec and who puts the contract in front of you that you're just trusting them that what they say is what's in the contract, or that can happen too, and then you find yourself in a situation. Tom Petty actually was one of the first ones to kind of from my understanding, kind of bring that to light, where he ended up suing his record label for lying to him because he accidentally signed away all his publishing, which is in the music world means you're signing away all your royalties.
Yeah.
So every time your song gets played on the radio, the money's going to the manager or the label, not into you, the songwriter, into your pocket.
Yeah.
So anyone listening, don't sign away your publishing.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, maybe we could end it. So if I understand correctly, you have a documentary coming out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we able to talk a bit about that? Or?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So it was based on my desire to, when I turned 50, to be able to be listed on what's called the fastest known time website. So for trail runners, for ultramarathoners, for any distance, I think 5 kilometers or more, if you want to do a race against yourself or a race against a person who has done the trail or the road race before, you can put the fastest known time result up on this website. And it's not a group race. What it is, you do it on your own time and on your own day. It doesn't matter, because you are hoping to get a faster time than the person who did it last week. So for example, here in New Brunswick, I think we have about 5 or 6 fastest known time routes. These are famous trails that would be the Dobson Trail, the Fundy Footpath, and some First Nations trails up north. And essentially, there are runners who do these hoping to get the fastest time, and they just upload their information to the website. And if they do have the fastest time, then they have those bragging rights.
Okay.
So my desire was to get listed.
Okay.
So our mutual friend Colin and also Marcus Rogers, another friend of mine, we did the Fundy Footpath in I think 17 hours maybe, and that was the desire. So we made a documentary about it, and it's probably about 95% finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the editing post-production phase?
Yeah. Just have to do a few cleanup things, and then it'll be ready for the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is it going to be released?
Well, I'm hoping for a little stint with various, what would you say, film festivals that are specific for outdoors.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of.
Okay.
And if that fails, then I'll just put it on YouTube public. So I'm not. I know I'll never make money from it, but it's more like a birthday, a 50th birthday present to me that I can sort of have for my kids, my grandkids, great grandchildren, whatever. They'll see something that's will be there to remember me by.
Cool. And inspire.
Yeah,
get inspired
exactly.
by.
Yeah.
Did you get into the Boston Marathon? Did you get a qualifying time?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my 3 hours and 9 minutes will definitely get me in.
Okay.
Because 3 hours 20 minutes is for my age group is a requirement.
Okay.
So I have 11 minutes leeway, which I'm told it will pretty much guarantee me to get in.
Okay.
So that's 2026, and I have been filming up for a Boston documentary as well.
Oh, okay, very cool. So 2 docs in the
yes, exactly
in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yep.
All right, well, maybe we should plug. You want to plug your stuff, because I know you got a YouTube channel, Instagram. Like, people probably want to reach out to you or just follow. I mean, you've got some great series on your YouTube channel. So
yeah, I have quite a few different channels, and I think that markhemmings.com. That's MarkHemmings.com. That has all of my stuff on it. And if you're an Instagram user, that would be at Mark Hemmings. And by the way, on my Instagram, I have a link in bio, which goes to all of my other social stuff as well.
Cool.
And I'm always really happy to if anyone has a quick question, they can DM me on Instagram or whatever. I don't mind helping out people. And, I'm like, I'm a teacher. Half of the year, I teach photo workshops internationally. I'm always happy to help people.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And it's, it's motivating to have someone like yourself for those folks to reach out to.
Yeah.
Especially when they're just dipping their toe. And there's no age limits, right? Like you can get into photography when you're 10 and when you're 85. I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those hobbies and one of those arts, one of those crafts.
Yeah, so true.
Very cool. Awesome, Mark. Well, thanks a lot for coming by.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was really great. We'll have to chat again sometime. I can't wait to see the documentary, to be honest. So.
And by the way, I don't know if I told you this, but I was the station manager of CRSJ back then, Campus Radio St. John.
Okay.
And right behind me, if you open up the drop ceiling, you're going to see my name signed on the concrete above the drop ceiling. 1994, probably.
Wow.
Yes. So I want to make sure that you do open up that drop ceiling. Not right now, but
no.
Take a picture of it, send it to me.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be the thumbnail for this episode.
Yes.
If I get the motivation to get on a ladder.
Yes. Do it safely.
I'll be safe. Yeah. I'll get my fall protection.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, I agree.
All the best.
See ya.